Okay. They're letting me do some of the technical parts, so we have two staffers backing me up to make sure I didn't mess this up. But I think we did it. I think we're live. Jesse Foley, we're live, right? You're mute.
I believe so. I think
we're good. Okay. And I'm going to make you, Jesse, the host so you can watch the waiting room.
Yep.
Lynn, okay, here you are. And I can watch and listen to the speakers better that way. Okay. We are technically off and running. So, thank you. I am State Representative Ken Gordon, and I co-chair this commission along with co-chair Senator Mike Brady. Welcome, Chair Brady. This is
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and welcome to everyone, and especially our staff that does an incredible job with technology, because I couldn't keep up with it. So thank you for all your help, Jesse and the rest of the crew there. So thank you to everyone else who's on today.
Thank you, Senator. This is the 8th meeting of the Special Legislative Commission to study and examine the civil service law, personnel and administrative rules, the hiring procedures and bylaws for municipalities not subject to civil service law, and state police hiring practices. A word of our, just a quick word about our schedule before we begin, because today's going to be really fast. I anticipate a fascinating discussion of the civil rights aspect of the topic that we're addressing. This is our 8th meeting, and you know that we've been meeting every other week now since some of the technical challenges were overcome. However, for the benefit of the public and perhaps members of the media that might be watching, or if they ask us, any of us as commissioners, the statute that under which we're operating calls upon us to provide a report by September 30th, which is 6 days from now. We have applied for an extension until the end of March, and I expect that will come through. It hasn't yet. Today we'll have heard from almost all of the points of view that were assigned to this commission. We still will have yet to hear from the Correctional Officers Union because we ran late last meeting, and we are going to do that, I think, 3 weeks from today. If Lizzie can confirm that, right? I think it's 3 weeks from today. That hasn't gone out yet, but the chairs just figured that out, I think, yesterday. So they can have a chance to present their point of view as well. At that point, the chairs would like to, unless there's an objection, have at least one hearing where members of the public are invited and have access to present their points of view, and at least one hearing where the subcommittee chairs will present the findings and conclusions of and recommendations really of the subcommittees. I think it's our decision that we're going to, again, unless there's an objection to it, we're going to just keep plowing ahead, because we would rather do this report carefully and correctly than rush it. And so we are going to go ahead and schedule that next meeting. And again, if you're asked, we've had 8 meetings of this commission. We've had various meetings of the subcommittees. We're working hard. And after a bit of a late start because of the COVID challenges that we've had, and again, you remember, you were all here, that we started, and when we started, we had to rely on the Legislative Information Services. They did the best they could, but they were stretched thin. Once, with the benefit of our wonderful staffs, as Chair Brady just said, we were able to figure out how to take care of ourselves from the point of view of the technology and convert to Zoom and live stream and do everything we needed to do to comply with Joint Rule 29A. We did that. And so we've been moving ahead every other week. I say that because I know that our next meeting is scheduled beyond September 30th. So with that, let's go right into the substance of our meeting. We are going to hear from representatives of the various entities involved with the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. We're going to focus on the civil service laws. And as we do, and for the benefit of the public, I want to call a roll call kind of quickly. If you just tell me whether you're here or not. I saw many of you when I let you into I cleared out the waiting room, so, but I want the public to know. Marcella King, Department of Corrections.
Present.
Michael Papani, Firefighters.
I'm
Union.
present. Good morning.
Good morning. Tom Reddy, Police Union.
Present, good morning.
I think Ariel Sharma, are you here representing Sophia Hall? Or Sophia Hall, but I don't think you're here. Okay, we're expecting Ariel Sharma representing the ACLU a little later, I guess. Neil Osborne, are you here?
Neil's here.
NAACP, and I know you'll be presenting. Lawrence Calderon. Larry, are you here? Okay, Christopher Del Monte. Was that Chris? Chief. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Jim Wona, Fire Chiefs.
Present, good morning.
Good morning. Jeffrey Lopes.
Present, good morning.
You, and I know we'll hear from you. Stephen Gabriel, I'm sorry. Okay, Stephen Gabriel called, said he's unable to attend. That remains the case, right? You're not here? Okay.
Mark Wheeler in for Stephen Gabriel. So
Thank you very much.
Mark
Wheeler,
Thank you.
Mark Wheeler. I see. Thank you. And all of you as commissioners know you can designate someone to appear for you at any of these commission hearings. Robert Quinnen, Civil Service.
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Eric Estepanis, Office of Public Safety.
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Ron Renault, ANF.
Present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Richard Sweeney, Mass Bar. You're not here yet, right? Attorney Sweeney said he may be late, so when he joins us, let's see, we'll notice. Tom Lyons, Veteran Services Agents. Tom Lyons, okay. Secretary Poppy, I think I saw you come in.
Good morning. Present.
Hello. Jesse Flynn, I think I see you too.
Present, thank you.
Jen Breaker,
Present, thank you.
thank you. Kimberly Parr, you're here.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Rep. China Tyler, I heard you coming in.
Present.
Okay. Rep. Maria Robinson,
Present.
and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep. Natalie Higgins, I saw you.
Present.
I heard from Rep. Patricia Haddad, she has a conflict, can't be here. So someone representing Rep. Haddad from your office? Okay. Rep. Whalen, I see you.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning. Senator Moore,
Mark Skobicki here on behalf of Senator Moore.
I welcome. Senator Kennedy, Edward Kennedy. Okay. And Senator Bruce Tarr. Harak, are you here? Okay, Harak usually joins us. He'll probably be later. The minutes were sent out recently. You should have received those. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Second,
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody, anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, the ayes have it, and the minutes are accepted. First presentation is going to come from the NAACP affiliate representatives. Commissioner Neil Osborne, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Co-Chair Gordon. Good morning, fellow commissioners and staff. I do need to take care of one housekeeping matter as we begin. I find myself in the position of needing to make a disclaimer. My appointment to this commission, any work that I do with this commission, and anything I say this morning comes from my 2 decades of work with the NAACP and is not reflective of my position with the City of Medford as Chief People Officer. Anything that I do here is not a position of the city nor our current mayor. I'm happy that I work in a position where she finds the work that I do in the community an asset, and that's why I'm here today. So if anyone wants to say or imply that what I say is what the City of Medford is saying, they are wrong. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, I can begin. What I plan to do, I've invited Mr. Juan Cofield. He is the current president of the New England Area Conference, and he also sits on the national board, 64-member national board. He will give a statement. I will then come back on and I will go over a survey that I've put out there with our general members just to get a sense of where they are with civil service. So as I invite Juan to unmute himself for his presentation, if the host could make me a co-host, I'll be able to share my screen when I come back on.
Just so we're clear, that's Jesse. That's you.
Yes.
And I saw Juan Cofield is on. If he could unmute him, is he able to unmute himself? Juan, are you available?
Good. Yes, I am. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. To the members of the commission and staff, thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning. I am Juan Cofield, president of the New England Area Conference of the NAACP. The New England Area Conference is the governing and coordinating entity of the NAACP for branches in the 5 New England states of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. There are 14 branches in Massachusetts, stretching from the Berkshires to Martha's Vineyard. I am here today speaking on behalf of those 14 Massachusetts, New Hampshire branches. Veterans are appropriately given a preferential status in the civil rights in the civil service system for hiring purposes by governmental entities for their service to our country. African Americans should also be given preferential status as a measure of reparative justice for their treatment by governmental entities. 1, beginning on November the 19th, 1699, most African Americans were brought to these lands as enslaved people, and most remained in that condition of servitude until until the Emancipation Proclamation was signed on September the 22nd, 1822, or B, until Union Army General Gordon Granger announced in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865, that all enslaved people were free, or C, until the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on December the 6th, 1865. 2, that a stereotype of African Americans being a lesser people was so enshrined in the American ethos that the U.S. Supreme Court held in 1857 in the Dred Scott versus Stanford decision that the U.S. Constitution was not meant to include African American citizenship for Black Americans, regardless of whether they were enslaved or free. And so the rights and privileges that the Constitution confers upon American citizens could not apply to them. The court further ruled that Black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which the Constitution provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. 3, that following the emancipation of enslaved African Americans, Jim Crow laws, customs, and practices were employed designed to deprive African Americans the full exercise of their rights under the U.S. Constitution, segregate African Americans from other American citizens, even arriving immigrants who were not yet citizens, or deny African Americans the full benefit of government opportunities and services afforded other citizens. 4, that in the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, laws were enacted, practices, policies, and customs were employed which have had the effect to segregate, discriminate against, deny rights and opportunities to African Americans. 5, that other citizens, even non-citizens, have benefited from the differential privileges afforded them to the disadvantage of African Americans. And 6, that such living circumstances of African Americans has resulted in persistent conditions of A, on average, dramatically lower levels of family wealth, B, on average, significantly lower income levels, C, average higher unemployment rates, D, a history of discrimination in the hiring, firing, and promotion of African Americans by the public and private sectors, E, a history of redlining by insurance companies, lending institutions, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development policies against African Americans. F, the targeting of predatory loans for African Americans by lending institutions. G, the lack of robust business community fueled by African American owned businesses. H, lower quality public schools leading to an education achievement gap. I, neighborhoods subject to more hazardous environmental conditions. J, less access to quality health care and the inability to affordable, healthy living conditions. K, inadequate public health policies to focus resources on conditions and diseases which disproportionately afflict African Americans, leading the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to report a life expectancy gap between African Americans and other citizens. L, communities with more despair and lack of hope, leading to greater mental health issues, drug addiction, and often more crimes of person and property. M, a criminal justice system that too often incarcerates African Americans because of conditions caused by poverty, mental health issues, and homelessness. N, bias in the criminal justice system, leading to longer incarceration sentences for African Americans. And O, discrimination in policing tactics, leading to excessive force and killings by law enforcement officers of African Americans. In summary, for the forestated reasons, reparative justice should provide for preferential status for African Americans in the manner it is provided for veterans. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you this morning.
Thank you, Juan, for that presentation. It's greatly appreciated you getting a chance to speak with the commissioners. So I thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. Now I'm going to try and share my screen if I can be made the co-host.
I believe you should be able to, but let me know.
Let's see what we got here. Screen, screen 2. All right, great. Share. Right, let's see. All right. So what I wanted to do to present to the commissioners was get a better sense of what the average NAACP community member was thinking, whether or not civil service issues were even on their radar. So at the top of this survey, it shows which actual branches they were affiliated with. You can see some people put in slightly different names. So Mystic Valley has some different names and shows New Bedford branch. They contributed, and there are a few other branches who did actually give some responses. So one of the first questions that I presented to them was, do you know if the city or town where you live follows civil service requirements? Just to even get a sense of, do they know what's happening in their own communities? And you can see majority do, some don't know, and others are a no. The next two questions I presented was asking about employment percentages for the police departments and the fire departments. And I specifically asked two distinct questions to get a sense of how they were viewing the police departments and the fire departments. And the numbers show that it looks that they think it's sort of identical for police and fire. The next question I presented, which departments does a better job of employing people of color? And 50% say they didn't know, which is slightly surprising to me because I know in my community, the police department is doing better, but I was just curious what others were happening in other communities. I also asked them about their satisfaction with the recruiting efforts for police and fire. And you can see an overwhelming group of them say, no, something more needs to be done. I also posed the question, because I think it's important if we're going to solve this problem, who's going to step up to do the work? Would they be personally willing to encourage young persons in their community to consider employment in fire or police? So an overwhelming number of the local NAACP members are willing to partner with local communities to begin to do the work so that better recruitment can take place. I also asked them about whether or not they thought civil service was negatively impacting people of color. And you can see a majority of them saying yes, some I didn't know, and a 14% were maybe. Then I also asked them about their thoughts on the veterans' preference. And this was 50% saying yes, they thought it was negative, and the other half didn't know, or maybe, or no. Now, after I asked them all those 9 questions where I gave them specific choices for answers, I gave them an open-ended question. What changes, if any, would you like to see in the recruiting and hiring of your local police and fire departments? What could improve the racial, ethnic, and gender diversity of those departments by increasing the number of diverse applicants? So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I was able to copy and paste this into a word cloud as a visual way to maybe find some key terms that some of these activists are thinking about. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to point out a couple of the open-ended comments from there, and I'll certainly share this whole report and every answer with the other commissioners so you can see all the different responses. But give me 1 second. So this is a word cloud rendering of some of the comments, but some of the things that were written in that comment section about what to do was, I think there's a need for more women of color. Another commenter said, I would like to see them go to local colleges and table. I would like them to come and talk with local Black churches and set up tables that would provide information on the process. Another commenter said there needs to be better effort on recruiting people of color. Another commenter, I am not entirely familiar with the hiring procedures of Dartmouth, but at a minimum, I would want to see a diverse search committee, outreach to BIPOC community, advertising in the media, which reached the BIPOC community. Another person said transparency of all practices and hiring criteria that reflects the demographics of the community. One person said, get rid of civil service. It's not ever helped with the diversity in law enforcement or public safety jobs. No one yet has given a solid example of the benefit of social service. Another one, only 2% of Arlington residents are Black. So statistically aiming for a matching ratio between police and fire personnel and residents won't accomplish much. So this is a way of, this is a wrong initiative for our town. Better to push for proactive racial diversity. Also, I'm guessing that unlike decades ago, veterans' preference will favor Black applicants. So those are just a few of the different comments to the open-ended questions. And that sort of ends our presentation, and I guess we have some time for questions. And I'll stop sharing my screen, see if I do that. All right, I'm back. Any questions?
Sorry about that. I'm coming back to the gallery view. Thank you very much for those two very interesting presentations. Commissioner Osborne, I saw that there were 28 responses in that survey. How many went out? In other words, what was that percentage of response?
So here's the technological problems with NAACP branches. I sent it out to all the presidents, and the presidents have to disseminate it to their own groups. As you can see, the branches that did well were Mystic Valley area, which is Medford, Arlington, Malden, Woburn, and Everett, and New Bedford really did well. So the results are definitely skewed between that suburban community and New Bedford. But I wanted to give you a flavor of what the average person in the NAACP is thinking about this.
I appreciate that. Do you have a sense in the work that you've done with the NAACP, or one, beyond the 28 responses? Because I think we would cover some of the cities that weren't covered, Boston, Worcester, Springfield, as to whether those responses would be consistent or whether there would be other ideas put on the table that we didn't see in those answers.
I'll start. I would suspect that there are diverse thoughts and other creative ideas that would be shared if we could get a larger sampling. But the general view is we know something's not right. We know when we're about in our communities, the people in those public safety positions don't look like us. And for the police, unfortunately, it's a sense of safety and well-being that those individuals who carry a gun and a badge have this awesome power. And we're hoping that those people can be a more diverse group.
Thanks. We acknowledge there's a problem that exists, and the policing bill that we passed, that from which this study commission was formed, certainly has language in there. The issue is we're looking through civil service to find answers. How can we make things better? One of the issues that came out in your responses that's really interested me and several members of this commission has been through education, specifically vocational education and the community colleges. And just speaking for myself for a moment, but I don't think I'm the only one who thinks this, a partnership with some entities, like perhaps churches in marginalized communities and educational institutions, might be of great benefit to provide not only exposure to the opportunity, but also a way of training. Can you talk about that? I mean, is that something help for?
Yeah, so the NAACP branches throughout the state would want to partner with getting that message out there. So if the message is also coming from the local elected officials and a trusted person in the community that says, hey, this is a route you can go to have a very good shot of joining your local police or fire department. The survey clearly says we want to help.
I thank you for that response, because if we were to create a word cloud from what we're hearing,
yes,
recruiting, getting that word out about the opportunity would be a very big word for us, and we're hearing it from within civil service. We're hearing it from the municipality. I see Secretary Poppy's head. You're agreeing with it. We would love as a jointly to help get this word out as to this opportunity, and then create a better opportunity to do that. Before I get to Secretary Quinnen, I mean, that's Representative Whalen, I see your hand. I'm going to ask that you raise your hands electronically, because then you pop up to the top of the screen, and you might be on the second screen. I won't be able to see a physical hand raise. I do want to give Co-Chair Brady a chance to ask questions, and then I'll go into the commissioners.
And
Thank you,
I don't want to
Mr.
cut. I don't want to cut off Juan Cofield. He actually is the president of the local New England area conference, and so if he wants to chime in, he is the longest serving person and with the most experience. So I don't want to limit his ability to respond to questions too.
Yes, and I appreciate that you brought him in to speak with us. That was the intent behind these presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and President Cofield. I got a question. I saw Brockton in the list. For disclosure, I'm a member of the NAACP in Brockton.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did they respond? Oh, did you get a response from the Brockton branch?
Just the one. So it didn't look like the general membership really took to answering the survey. It's a little bit technical, but we're doing the best we can.
If I can ever be of help with that, please let me know. I know that over the years, Brockton has tried to do a better job, and they have, as far as hiring people of color in the fire department and the police department, but there has been a disparity in women, and they are starting to do a better job, more so in the police department, because even at the higher ranks, it wasn't until more recently that women in the police department has attained the administration level of the police department. That was a definite glaring disparity when I first got on the city council back in '96, but they have started to do better. I also used to work at Massasoit Community College long before I got in the State House with a grant program that was, and I recruited from the church communities and everything else to get people into the construction union jobs. And it was very successful. And some of these members are still doing great and great paying jobs with benefits, et cetera. But unfortunately, one of our former governors cut the program, and I've been trying to get that re-implemented since those days. But if I, again, as I mentioned, if you can contact me directly if you need me to reach out to my local branch. So
Appreciate that. Thank you.
thank you, Commissioner. Okay.
Juan,
Yes, thank you. I want to first go back and add something to your question. I think Representative Gordon, regarding the involvement, greater involvement of voc ed schools. I think many of the state senators and representatives that are a part of this commission are participating in this Zoom session may be aware that a coalition was formed 2 or 3 years ago, a broad-based coalition to address the issue of apparent discrimination of people of color in admissions in voc ed schools.
Yep.
And the DESE just passed some, changed the requirements, the admission requirements to address the issue of discrimination of admission in voc ed schools. So I want to make you aware, the commission aware, that there is a problem there. It's been recognized, and the commission is not pleased with and is not satisfied with the response from DESE in the measure that was passed a month or 2 ago. And we are considering it, and with the thought that there may be the necessity of a lawsuit to end the discrimination by voc ed schools in Massachusetts.
yeah,
But that's only part of the solution. Recruitment is only part of the solution if you get people who are otherwise qualified and they don't have a preferential status. The preferential status is given to another group of people. Those qualified people who score reasonably well on the exam may never get the opportunity with the preferential status just for veterans.
okay, thank you.
So I think you're certainly going to have to address that problem.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do realize that we've got to take, we have a charge, but also a whole, at least a section of a report dealing with the holistic approach to solving this problem. You can't solve just one, you can't solve this by looking at just one avenue. And you're right. I mean, the disparity in, for example, discipline in schools, which leads to more difficult admission to a voc school is something that's been looked at and will continue to. So Commissioner Quinn, and you had your hand up first. I was going to order of when the hands came up.
Thank you very much. And my question for Commissioner Osborne and President Cofield would be whether, in your estimation, gaps in outreach and recruitment efforts are more acute at the state level or at the local community level. In other words, if we were to prioritize putting resources into narrowing the gaps in what should be an appropriate outreach and recruitment effort, would you look first to state entities to help solve the problem, or focus on local public safety departments?
I guess for me, it's a two-part answer. There are some communities in Massachusetts that have denser diversity. That probably has to be the focus for those populations who don't see themselves in these law enforcement and fire safety positions. Certainly, prioritizing that would be critical, because not every city and town has higher levels of diversity, but at some point, the state in itself needs to make sure that its numbers are also matching the population for the full state. So that's my non-answer of it needs to be done both places, but let's start with the areas with the most dense population, diverse populations.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Representative Whalen, Commissioner Whalen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize early when I was doing this. Technology continues to be a challenge for me, and I just learned how to raise my hand digitally. I just want to begin by thanking President Caulfield and Commissioner Osborne for your thoughtful and very informative testimony before us today. It's certainly going to be helpful as we go forward in developing a report from this commission. I just wanted to put out for edification, many people here may know, some may not, that there are police training options that are available outside of civil service. Fitchburg State University has a program they run up there where it's a 5-year program. You graduate with a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, and upon graduation, you're also certified as a police officer. That's a way. I mean, I have personal friends of mine who had their daughter that just graduated from there and was hired recently by the police department in Orange. Police departments are certainly out there, non-civil service departments, looking for trained police officers who are already certified so that the municipality can save the money on going through the training. This can also be done through self-sponsorship that the MPTC offers. And that may be something that we can have a conversation on. Typically, the self-sponsorship costs somewhere in the area of north of $3,000 for a student to attend, and that can be prohibitive for some folks. I remember when I was in my 20s, my early 20s, there was no way I was going to be able to pony up $3,000 and then attend a full-time academy. But maybe we can look at some point and have a conversation on trying to make a scholarship, put together a scholarship program to get some of these economically disadvantaged young women and men the opportunity to self-sponsor, and then they could, with their certification, avail themselves of many hiring opportunities within these departments. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Representative Whalen, and you made a good point. Technically, about if anyone wants to raise your hand, you find the raise hand function on reactions at the bottom of your screen. And again, we don't stand on formality. If I see your hand, I'll call on you, but I might not see your hand visibly with these number of attendees. Jesse Flynn, though, I do see your hand. You're next up.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner Osborne and President Cofield. Thank you for that presentation. I just wanted to agree that I think that outreach and recruitment is very important. And just going off of one set of data I have is the Boston Fire Department over the years has really put a focus on recruitment and outreach while remaining under the civil service system. That recruitment and outreach has led to the last 6 academy classes being the most diverse in the history of the Boston Fire Department. The current class of around, I don't have the exact number, but around 60 recruits is 37% minority entry-level employees. That's a huge increase from years past, and I think that it's a testament to the outreach, the focus on outreach and recruitment that that department has had. And I think that it shows that it's possible to do it within civil service. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is if we, I know Commissioner Osborne has been on for all these hearings, and we've heard from many municipalities that have revoked civil service. And part of the reason they revoked civil service was that they were, claiming that they were unable to diversify while under the civil service system. Time and time again, whether it was Burlington, Norwood, Marlborough, those municipalities failed to diversify once out of civil service. But what we did lose was the transparency and the oversight of the civil service system, along with the preference schedule for survivors, veterans, disabled veterans, Gold Star family members. So I just wanted to see how you felt about the majority of police departments, which are outside of civil service, which it's very difficult for us to even track who they're hiring and why. And then I have one follow-up after that.
I'm appreciative of the process that we are going through right now as a commission to sort of look at that data, because we should be able to make good decisions by having good data. So if the data says that they don't increase diversity and that was the reason, well, what can we do to make the civil service system work in a way that makes sense and removes the barriers so that we can have the transparency, we can have the tracking, and we can have increased applicants who are qualified and ready to be join these police and fire departments.
Thank you. My focus is, I know this is about civil service, but I feel like we scrutinize heavily the civil service communities that operate under this preference schedule and that operate under the oversight of the state and that have to have, very public hiring processes, but we're ignoring the majority of police departments that are outside of that system. And we're not really focusing on what they're doing and who they're hiring, because it seems to me that they have almost a worse diversity issue than the municipalities that are within the current civil service system. I did just want to ask one other question. To that end, would the NAACP support legislation that would require all departments that are filing home rule petitions to revoke civil service to enter into some sort of like voluntary consent decree with the Attorney General's office, so that we can ensure if they're leaving civil service in order to diversify, that we can ensure that they're actually keeping their promise and diversifying?
I will say the wonderful thing about NAACP, and if you're not a member, please think about it. It's a deliberative process where you get to go to a membership meetings and say, hey, I have an issue and I'd like to debate it and discuss it. So an issue like that can be presented to branches. It can be presented to the leadership at the New England area conference. So it's a topic for discussion.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before we go to Secretary Poppe, I just want to point out in response to Commissioner Flynn, what you said, we do have a subcommittee that's focused specifically on the non-civil service communities. You're probably a member of that, and Representative Higgins chairs that subcommittee. So all of those thoughts are very important and valuable. Anything that's shared in those subcommittee meetings that are also held pursuant to Joint Rule 29A, so they're all available to the public and can be viewed by everybody from the commission, whether you've attended a subcommittee meeting or not. That's important, and that will all be used when we create our report and recommendation. So while I agree with you that we may not have been looking as a whole at these communities, this commission is. Okay, Secretary Poppe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Osborne and President Cofield, for your presentation. I just had one clarifying question. When you made a recommendation that there be a specific preference in reparation, is that recommendation in addition to veterans preference or in lieu of veterans preference? Just so that I'm clear.
Yes, it's in addition to the veterans preference. We certainly think that the veterans preference is appropriate. I just want to be clear because there are misgivings in the nomenclature. What we are calling this is reparative justice and not reparations. For some, reparations means giving out a check. That's not what we are suggesting of giving here. It's like the whole misnomer about defunding of police. That's not. So we want to be clear that here we are calling this reparative justice.
Thank you. I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Surely.
Thank you. Chief Del Monte?
So thank you very much, Commissioner. Just a couple of things. And thank you very much, Commissioner Neal and President Cofield, for your presentations. Very valuable. And I got a lot from both. Just a couple of things. One is, I don't think there's a suggestion, or at least I haven't heard this. The data supports that communities that leave civil service are conducting a process that is biased. At least I haven't seen the data that supports that. But I do have a question for both of you, gentlemen. Do you think in this day and age, police departments are feeling that they are being squeezed for personnel? Our numbers of people who want to join the police departments is down. Demand hasn't really reduced. And so I guess the thing that we're looking to do is on the police chief side is try to find out where we can make these improvements in our systems. And as a consequence of kind of being squeezed between that shrinking candidate pool and trying to find good candidates, obviously, to fill our ranks from all backgrounds and all walks of life, do you think it would be advantageous if we looked at, at least on the civil service side, if we looked at maybe expanding that candidate pool? So as you know, this has been raised a few times, 2N+1. The current standard with civil service is quite restrictive on the candidate pool that you're going to get and receive. It makes it very difficult on communities. And I'm just wondering if you think that it would be advantageous to look at or recommend improving that or expanding that formula for candidate pools.
Commissioner Del Monte, I appreciate that question because actually in my role for the city of Medford as a chief people officer, it's part of my job to try and get folks hired onto our police and fire departments. And when we see these diverse applicants, whether they be women or language specialists or Hispanic folks, we want to find a way that if you want to work in our community, that we can get you on. And if that's a barrier that can be taken away, well, we would, as a branch, as a social justice organization, we would support those things. Again, we have to sort of think it through, but removing the barriers so folks say, you know, it's worthwhile for me to put this effort in, because I don't think people are making a snap decision to be a fireman or a police officer. That comes from a young age. You're in high school, or maybe you're in college, and you begin to prepare to be a person who can serve in that important role. So yeah, I think that's a good area to explore.
Thank you for that.
If I might add a little something in response to the question, I think NAACP branches in local communities are a resource that very few municipalities have explored and addressed, have approached to address the problem. I dare say that probably in Massachusetts, not more than a handful, if that many, police departments, public safety departments have reached out to NAACP branches and asked for their help and support. I am the person that is responsible for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Never, and my guess is that the public safety, state police are having the same difficulty in attracting certainly police recruits of color. No one has ever reached out to me from the state level and said, Cofield, we need your help. We'd like for you to work with us and for us to work with you to recruit possible recruits of color. And this is a process and we'd like your assistance. I don't think that's happening. If in fact there's a problem of recruitment, then it's the responsibility of the local police departments to address it in an appropriate manner.
Thank you. Thank you. I will point out that one of the reasons we're together is because we are reaching out for the help of your community, your organization, and we value it, appreciate it. It's been a very, very valuable presentation. So, Ron Renaud, Commissioner Renaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And President Cofield, that's probably a great segue into what I was going to mention. The administration in the past has used a program called Access and Opportunity, and it's an outreach program. And Rep. Tyler and I actually worked on this, maybe 4 years ago. She can correct me if I'm wrong. And it was for minority contractors to do business with the Commonwealth. And it was recruiting and telling people how to do business with the Commonwealth. So my point, Mr. Chair, in this comment is to support Commissioner Osborne and President Cofield's recommendation about community outreach and access and opportunity, and bringing the message to the street, to the community activists, to the first time I actually really heard this today was the churches, and that really resonated. So bringing, even as simplistic as it may sound, just from my heart of hearts, bringing people with tables and literature and explaining the process on how to engage, to be a firefighter, a police officer, join civil service, et cetera, all the different nuances. I would strongly recommend and support that and offer the access and opportunity model that the administration built, that this would support this initiative as well.
Thank you. Jesse, you got, I don't know if you're looking for.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to double dip. I just had one more question, just because I just opened up the public records request we made to HRD and was just looking at some of the numbers for Medford, just because Mr. Osborne's just the chief people's officer there, and I just want to ask a quick question on that. Is it looks like the 2021 police exam, there was only one veteran, 0 DAVs, and one veteran that took the exam and then claimed Medford residency, representing only 1.4% of test takers. And then I just looked at the civil service eligible list for Medford Police, and there's not any veterans on the list at all. So I'm just wondering, given that there's no veterans at the top of the list or anywhere on the list, do you feel that it's more of a outreach problem in Medford or an education problem on the civil service exam that's the barrier for diverse candidates reaching the top of the list? Because it just doesn't seem like veterans' preference has any effect at all on the Medford Police list.
Part of it is perception that the civil service process creates barriers. And if you want to succeed or invest in a career, you don't spend time and effort into a career where you know there's an extra hurdle or a few hurdles that you need to get over in order to be welcome into that career.
So what would you do to make it? Do you think it's just outreach and education on the part of Medford to its minority community that might want to be police officers on the civil service process? Or, because I mean, there's always going to be a process, and probably a rigorous one, to become a police officer. So what's the answer in Medford? What do we do there to?
So because that's actually part of the job that I do, and because civil service currently exists, we have to work within the system that's there. And we have been out there going to events. I have the great support of our current chief of police. He will go with me to tour events, and I will tell people in the audience that they need to help us do it, because they need to talk to the young people in the community to get them to begin to think about it. And I think hopefully us now as commissioners reviewing the civil service, that we can make it easier and that perception can come away and we can get more people involved and hired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Quinnen, and then we're going to, unless there are any more questions, we're going to move on to our next presentation.
Thank you. I wanted to raise the question of residency preference for a moment. In Commissioner Osborne's presentation, I recall a survey response indicating that 61% of the NAACP members surveyed thought that civil service requirements negatively impact the chances of minority candidates. And I'm sure it would take a lot of discussion to sort of unpack that and understand, exactly what requirements we're talking about that might be perceived as having a negative impact. But let's focus on the residency preference. Do you think that is something that should be entirely at the discretion of local officials? Or does the state have any role in determining whether residency preference should continue in its existing form in given municipalities, depending on whether it has an adverse impact on underrepresented groups or not?
I guess I'm not sure I have a good answer to that question, but I certainly can share with you, if you grow up in a city or town, that's the place that you want to work. I don't know, removing the barrier makes it easier, or having the residency requirement would make it easier. But certainly someone who has grown up and whose family has a home in Medford, they want to be a police officer in Medford.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to our next presentation, which is the representatives from the ACLU, and we have Ariel Sharma. Ariel, are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Attorney Ariel Sharma with Lawyers for Civil Rights. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you all today. So for those who don't know, Lawyers for Civil Rights is an organization that works primarily with people of color and immigrants to protect their rights in a number of practice areas, among those housing and relevant today, employment. We work closely with organizations like the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers, or MAMLEO, and then the Vulcans, which is the Firefighters Firefighters Association for firefighters of color. We also work with the NAACP. I'm glad to see Juan Cofield and the other representative and Mr. Osborne here, and other groups, similar groups that recognize the need for diversity in our civil servants and better for protections for those people of color who have already chosen to take up that mantle of service. We also, among our work, we do direct representation. And so we've represented a number of individuals who have been unfairly bypassed in favor of applicants who scored lower than them. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and some other issues today. One example that we recently had was we won a victory on behalf of a gentleman who scored very well on the exam, but then gets bypassed for a 16-year-old continue without a finding, QUAF, which is not considered a conviction in Massachusetts. And that came from a nonviolent incident when he was a child. His experience is unfortunately very common, where the same minor charges or minor discipline that we see attached to people of color are suddenly taken as character deficiencies and used as bypass. Whereas if a white applicant has that exact same record or history, they're considered to have just been being teens or just a blip in their record. Barriers like this and others are not only unfair to applicants themselves, but it's also unfair to the community as a whole. Diversity in our public services is important, as we've all recognized today. Communities need to have trust in their civil services because trust leads to open sharing of information and overall safer interactions. Overall, research has shown that diversity in that workplace legitimizes the authority, particularly of the police, strengthens both police and fire forces, and overall increases public safety. If a community can't see themselves or their family members as being part of the force, suddenly that force is an other as opposed to part of the group and part of the community, which leads to mistrust and makes it harder for that public safety purpose to be carried out. There are also certain cultural competencies that come from being part of a community, whether it's being able to understand the language or just being able to understand the slang that goes on in that community, or if it's about how to read certain nonverbal cues. These diversities make interactions with the community go smoother, which is particularly important in high stress situations that our civil servants engage in. I think it's important though that it's not just the candidate that we hire that himself or herself can interact better with the community, but it leads to the rest of the force having a better understanding of that community, because once they're interacting with someone on a regular basis, again, we take away this mystery, we take away this other, and we begin to see and teach everyone within the force that this way of being is normal, as opposed to, again, being out of place, being a threat, being something that we don't understand or don't expect. But unfortunately, as we know, that there are many ways that the civil service exam in itself poses difficulties to minorities being on the force. So we begin to discuss, I begin to discuss the bypass issues. And we found that through our work that people of color are disproportionately bypassed. And it's disheartening, but probably unsurprising that this is one of the places in the civil service process where the discretion is allowed. So when we have discretion allowed into the process, biases suddenly are coming out and able to create barriers. And so I think that there is a huge barrier with, as we mentioned above, different candidates being treated differently based on the same records or same history or same issues. And so we would suggest, certainly a bias training for those people making those decisions, but not just one when it's time to make the decisions, but ongoing, regular, and constant. Another important thing is that oftentimes within police departments and fire departments and the like, what we do is we send one person out to a training and then they come back and try to do the training. It's really important that we use people who this is their job to do bias trainings, to come into organizations and come in with a clear eye and not, oh, well, I know this guy and he's not biased, so I think that he's okay, even if he says something a little questionable. We need to have outside people who are not invested in the organization coming in to produce these bias trainings. Another civil service impediment that we at LCR have challenged is the use of hair drug tests, which I know have been losing favor, but there are disproportionately false positive results for people with African-American hair types. And those, again, are used to bypass certain candidates. In addition to addressing disproportionate and biased application of bypass, I think we also need to take a look at the preferences that we're using and how those are being applied. One that we've already heard quite a bit about is the veterans preference. And we have no question that we should be honoring and supporting veterans as they come back from service of our country. But one of the issues that we often see is that the veterans preference is being disproportionately used to hire white veterans and still passing over Black and brown veterans. So the same service, the same actions are being treated differently depending on who it is that's taking them. And so we have to be actively investigating and holding accountable those departments that are using the preferences to uphold racism instead of for their intended purpose. It's not enough to just say that this is how they're supposed to do it. We have to also be enforcing it in some way. Additionally, the approval process for language preference should be reviewed, expanded, and made significantly more transparent. It's our understanding that a lot of municipalities don't understand or are not sure if they can meet the barrier or are not able to get the paperwork through to meet that barrier. And then, of course, language does not necessarily overlap with ethnic and racial diversity. It often does, and it also leads to a certain amount of cultural competence that comes from fluently speaking a language of the people that you're serving. As a last point, I just want to add that, as we've been discussing, public education can't be undersold. Too many people simply think that they never have a chance, and so they never get started. And that requires not just getting out and getting the information in some of the ways that have been discussed that I think really make a lot of sense, but it also involves changing the internal culture of departments that make them hostile. If people are hearing from current firefighters and current police officers that their job is more difficult because of the color of their skin, they are not going to want to apply. And unfortunately, what we see is that when people bring this even into the public eye, we have departments fighting tooth and nail, no matter if a judge has already said that that's the case, no matter what evidence has been brought out, that they're looking more to deny it than they are to fix the problem. And then I think, it's sort of in that same vein, considering alternatives to the exam altogether, there has been some success with cadet programs. And I know the Vulcans in particular are very excited about that perspective. And partnering with community organizations, whether it's community colleges or other places where people are looking to get their career off the ground. But as much as we want and do talk and put out recommendations, it's extremely important that the recommendation or change is only as good as the ability to implement it. So there has to be resources and funding put behind it after these recommendations get put out. We're fighting entrenched systems that require long-term and consistent efforts to continue reviewing, questioning, and pushing for better. Any recommendation that comes out has to be re-reviewed, reconsidered, and seeing, one, is it working? And if it's not working, not just do we have to change the recommendation itself, but is it because there are still entrenched biases that are holding back what otherwise could be a good recommendation? So I thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And what you point out is a direction that we've got to consider, which is education and training and ongoing training. The need for that is significant. We've heard on this commission from, for example, Commissioner Quinnen about the people that he's represented who have in fact exercised their rights to exercise their rights under the law to question decisions that are made. It's unfortunate that people have to get to that point, that there was a decision that was made that's so questionable. But you're right that we can set the rules of the road. We've also got to make sure that those rules are honored, understood, and then enforced. And I'm glad that we have people right here in this commission that are engaged in that now, and that this commission is tasked to come up with ways to make that more efficient and to make it happen. I'm sorry, I don't have a question because I really understand. As an employment lawyer on my hours that I'm not a state rep, I do get what you're saying. It's significantly important. Jesse Flynn, first question. Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse, before I get to you, I forgot I want to turn over to my co-chair, Mike Brady, and then I'll get to the first question from the commission.
Dan, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. To reiterate a issue that was brought up in the last panel about residency. I know that, most communities adhere to collective bargaining, and we did have a residency rule in Brockton. It goes back and forth. For a couple of years, the administration or whoever's in charge will put in the residency requirements, then it gets taken away, then it's put back. But the most recent thing in my tenure, back when I was on the city council, before I became a legislator, most municipal employees have a right to collective bargaining, which I support. And there was a big debate and argument in regards to residency. And one example was if a police officer makes an arrest of somebody and then they're in jail for a certain amount of time and then they're out of jail, if the wife is shopping in a supermarket and she runs into this person that was put away for a while, is she being threatened in the atmosphere that the police officer is supposed to have to deal with? And then the other thing was there was an issue with a person who was single on a police department, and then the wife did not want to move into Brockton, so he had to make a choice whether stay on the force in Brockton or move to another town. He chose to get on a department in another town, but they do have a right to collective bargaining. And the law changed a few years ago to a 7-year tenure where they have to be in the city of Brockton. This was for all municipal employees because it started with the police and the fire department at the time. And then after 7 years, they can move out of town. The tough part is we want to keep good people living in the community, but again, they have the right to collective bargaining. Some officers chose to live in the community, even though they had the right to move out. So that's a big issue that came into play in the city of Brockton. I just want to let that be known because it was a statement made about residency laws. And I know that every couple of years, and again, there was another situation that they can also apply for a waiver if they have a good reason not to live in the community. But there was a question, why should they have to air their dirty laundry in public, you know? So that is always an ongoing debate just in the communities. And I know some smaller communities I represent, their reason for not having residency at all is they can't recruit because they have such a small town to fill the slots. And I know there was a mention earlier that with the atmosphere that's out there, I hear constantly that police departments are having a tough time recruiting applicants to go into the field. And I want to make sure we have all the factual information because we got to look at the statistics for that as well. In a big issue which worked, which I mentioned earlier, I don't mean to be repetitive, when we've gone into the church communities or community meetings and so forth, and kind of it's like anything, marketing that there is job opportunities in any field, that has helped to in the colleges. We have a community college in my district and Bridgewater State is right down the street. And we have some private like Stonehill College, et cetera. But doing better outreach helps get applicants into the field of these employees' positions. So I don't mean to go on too long, but I just want to mention, because I know the residency issue came up and it's always a big debate with residency. So I'll yield to the next person. I guess it's Jesse. So thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate some things I've said in the past, which is Veterans Preference is a affirmative action program for a marginalized, economically disadvantaged population that includes all races, all ethnicities, female veterans, LGBTQ veterans. To equate Veterans Preference with upholding racism is abhorrent, all right? That's a serious accusation to make about a preference that's been around for a long time and doesn't just help white men, but helps every realm of our society that chooses to enter into military service and protection of this country. I'd like to know if there's any data that you could give to support that type of an accusation.
Wait, before you answer, Jesse, I want to be clear that Ariel didn't say that it supports racism. What she said was that when someone is given a list that includes veterans of different communities, BIPOC people and white people, that her position is that the white veterans are preferred over the veterans of other races, not that veterans themselves, the supporting veterans themselves is inherently indicative of racism.
Well, with all due respect, I wrote down what she said, and she compared Veterans Preference to upholding racism. I wrote it down as she said it, and I just want to know, is there any data to support any of that? Any of it? I mean, the Lawyers Committee is a large law firm. They have a lot of people there. If you're going to make accusations like this, and a lot of accusations, where's the data to support this stuff?
Commissioner Flynn, again, well, I'll let you speak for yourself. She said the way it's applied in certain circumstances may do that. She did not say that the preference itself does that.
It equates to upholding racism, and I want to, okay, right, if you take your version of it, I'd like to know where the data is to support that.
I think it's fair that you have an opportunity to speak to it, but I don't agree that that's what you said.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Gordon. I did not say that it equates to racism. We very much do support. I think, and I'll go back to my notes so I can read exactly as I phrased it, that, let's see, where's my notes on Veterans Preference? That we very much believe and think it's incredibly important for us to recognize and support our veterans. But in our experience, what we see is that we should honor and support our veterans, and yet we see that Veterans Preference has been used to hire white veterans while black and brown veterans do not get the same benefit. And I pulled this from some information that we had in Boston, where we have a number of folks, particularly I believe it was and I can go back and pull up some notes and send them over to you, Senator Flynn, where we see a number of people who were on the list, were veterans, and were bypassed for white veterans instead. And I don't have it it directly in front of me at the time, but I'm happy to pull that and send it over to you.
I might have misheard it, but I wrote down at some point the words were used. Veterans preference is used to uphold racism.
All right,
Uphold.
I think we've established that that's not what she.
Well, it's recorded, so we'll go back and see it. But I mean, maybe I misheard it. If I did, I apologize. But I'm still not seeing the data to show that veterans preference is bypassing minority veterans, and I'll be happy to take that when it comes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Coyne.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Ms. Sharma, I'm aware that over the years, Lawyers for Civil Rights has made available pro bono legal representation to individuals who have, in their view, unfairly been bypassed in civil service hiring processes, and that lawyers also play an important role in, even before commencing legal representation, looking at bypass decisions that are made in communities governed by the federal court consent decree. My question would be whether, in your view, there ought to be any greater incentive or support for this activity on the part of the state. And I'm thinking in particular of a statute that allows for reimbursement of defense expenses when an employee prevails in a disciplinary appeal before the Civil Service Commission. There is not a similar provision when it comes to bypass cases. Do you think that that is an important gap in the system for looking out for those who believe that they've been unfairly bypassed?
Yeah, I think that's certainly an important consideration. You know, it sounds like we have a couple of lawyers on the call here. So one thing that we all know is that it's very hard to get a lawyer if you can't pay him. And so one of the major ways that lawyers get paid is from, you know, whether it's back pay, whether it's from attorney's fees that get awarded in certain types of cases, or the like. And so, you know, having something that allows attorneys to be able to take these on so that they can help folks who were improperly bypassed, I think is important. And then I think it's also an added reason for towns to take it seriously and to give it a little bit more review before applying a bypass. Certainly, I think we see often around budget time where there's always complaints from the community saying, well, you spent out this much money in lawsuits, you know, you could have just avoided that and used it on the things that you're asking to raise our taxes for or whatever like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have more questions? That's good. Okay, Secretary Poppy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Sharma, for your presentation. I think when you mentioned the data about, I think you said something relative to just now, Black and brown veterans don't get the same benefit as the white veterans. I'd be interested in seeing some of that data too, because my concern overall, and as everyone knows, is the veteran community is very diverse. And so if somehow we are not recruiting veterans, women veterans, veterans of color, diversity to encourage for the forces, and that's something we clearly need to work on. But I also just kind of want to mention as a point is I know there's a small pilot for the transition assistance program that exists when veterans are getting out of service. And I'm going to jot a note to say that perhaps this is another topic we should look at when veterans are getting out. We're talking about sending people to school programs for the training, and I have that, but I think maybe when a veteran's getting out of service, if they haven't thought about the force, all veterans, then maybe that's something, particularly where we're looking to recruit into police and fire and public safety positions, that might be another opportunity where we can really focus our attention with them. So any efforts with that, I appreciate knowing about that, but I'm gonna jot a note to them right now as they design this new pilot program, that this be a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an important point. If we can also couple that with education toward a degree in, say, fire science or an associate's degree, or toward policing, that would be important. Chief Del Monte, next up.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And so, Ms. Sharma, thank you very much, and thank you to the ACLU for your work. Just a couple of very quickly, I know we have some other speakers, Mr. Chairman. So just very quickly, I guess, how do we do things differently, I guess is the question. So when you talk about the number of people who are bypassed inappropriately, in Massachusetts, and I don't have the data in front of me, I don't have exact numbers, but anecdotally, there are hundreds, if not thousands, if I could use that, certainly hundreds, of people that are hired every year in police departments across the Commonwealth. And given that number, are you seeing the numbers of appeals based on that premise that they have been improperly bypassed? Does it support that this is a widespread experience? In other words, proportionally, given what's taken place, we know that there's a process in place for people to address that situation if they feel they've been improperly bypassed. But in your experience, proportionally, is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I also don't have exact numbers in front of me. What I'd say is the number of people who feel that they're improperly bypassed do not necessarily reflect, or who come to us saying that they've been improperly bypassed, not necessarily reflect the people who actually are. I think a lot of people are, particularly maybe, I don't want to use the word humble because it implies that people who are bringing up the issue aren't, but who don't see or aren't willing to go out of their way and look into, for whatever reason, aren't able to go and look into why it was that they're bypassed. So I would suspect that if we're seeing it with some people, we should be careful as to whether or not it's happening to a much larger portion of the population. And that's true, again, in any aspect of law where we get complainants. Typically there are more who have not come forward.
And so just an observation, my own experience and some of my colleagues is, as you know, the police chiefs are often accused of a lot of things. And certainly we try to do better in our profession, and we're trying to lead organizations in a better way and make improvements, which should always be a constant that we're trying to do. But you mentioned subjectivity, and this is a difficulty that we struggle with, is because we're trying constantly to find people, as I mentioned before, from all backgrounds and walks of life. And it's difficult because policing is a unique profession. And it's unique because at the end of the day, the police chiefs are ultimately responsible for all of their personnel and everything they do. And that's where there's really a rub in there. Like, how do we make improvements? Well, at the same time, probably one of the most important things that I do as a police chief and my colleagues do is selection of personnel, getting good people. And it's extraordinarily difficult. And I found that difficulty has nothing but increased through the years. So I guess there is a question in there about how you feel as though, how do we manage that? I understand there's always that component of subjectivity, but how do we manage that when at the end of the day, we're ultimately responsible for all of those decisions and all of the actions that our personnel take?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, I appreciated earlier when Mr. Cofield brought up some of the words that we use that sort of bring division instead of really talking about what we're talking about, right? Where he talks about the defund the police. I think that's a great example. But I think another example that this is another place where we're talking about it, right? Where we are asking for a lot out of the police department, and it starts sometimes to feel like an attack. And that's by no means what any of us are trying to do. And I think one of the important ways is being able to recognize that there is bias in the system, and implicit bias is an absolutely real thing. I have it, everyone has it, regardless of your race, regardless of your age, everyone has some implicit biases towards some group of people or towards some individuals. And the first step really is recognizing and embracing that as as something that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, certainly the acting out on it is a bad thing, but simply having an implicit bias is not a bad thing. And once we start addressing those in a real way, that's where we start to see change, because, you know, that feeling of at the end of the day, can I trust this person? It sounds like sort of what you're getting at, right? Because at the end of the day, it's my name on the line, it's my force on the line. And when the question of can I really trust this person is shadowed by implicit biases that we're afraid to address because we're afraid that it'll come back as them saying, oh, I'm racist, oh, I'm going to get sued for this and that. And we have to, I think, as a community, put all of that aside and say that we have to move forward instead of looking back.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can someone, Ariel, maybe you or maybe someone else on the commission, explain what type of training, diversity training, training as to how we look at people that, let's start with the police because it's Chief Del Monte that was asking the question. What exists now in Massachusetts on an ongoing basis for our public officers with respect to the type of diversity sensitivity that we're talking about?
Mr. Chairman, was that question to me?
It actually was to anybody. That's perfectly appropriate for you to respond if you have an answer.
So certainly, yeah. So what I could offer you is I can tell you for the last several years as part of the not only the recruit training, but in-service training curriculum for all police officers, implicit bias, fair and impartial policing, procedural justice, those have been at the core of policing for the past several years. That's not something that has recently started. Those are among the initiatives that policing is doing now.
So I've had the honor of traveling some places in the country, and I went with the chief in the town where I live, Chief Robert Bongiorno, and we talked about the renewed effort in diversity training among this happened in police departments in places and the changes it's made. So can you maybe Chief Del Monte address the changes that you've seen over the years that this, you know, the changes that this has caused, if any?
Well, very briefly, I think it's something that we're often looking, especially in training, we're often looking to make improvements in our profession. That's, to be honest with you, one of the proud pieces that I think in policing is that we're willing to make changes. We know things have to be done differently and make those improvements. And what I think is I'm probably most pleased about is that these are a part of core curriculums. These are not voluntary for a few people and for a few persons. These are across the board training components. Is that the end of training? Certainly not. There are plenty of other places to make improvements as we continue on. And I think those are important not to lose sight of. We still do those things. Some of the programs that we're looking to bring into Massachusetts are also ABLE trainings, active bystander, for law enforcement trainings. There are a host of other trainings that are out there to make those kind of improvements. So I think that's been the positive that I've seen on the policing profession.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't see hands, and so we, with a half hour left to our time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I had my hand raised. I was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I'm sorry, Michael.
That's okay. Just to answer on the fire side, similar to Chief Del Monte, we've had training for a number of years. It's ingrained in our system, not only at the department level, but at the union level, both locally, statewide, and through our international union. We have a focus in education annually through seminars and different conferences that we have, that we make sure that we are incorporating this kind of training that we're talking about. At the department level, it is incumbent on the individual department to take the initiative to get this kind of training. I think some are better than others. I think there's a refreshed and renewed emphasis on it, that we see more of it coming. But throughout the fire service, we certainly are aware and working to be better, similar to the fact that we have this commission.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. I actually see I'll tell you what, I see a question from Jeffrey Lopes, but you're up next. So Attorney Sharma, thank you very much for your presentation. And we are going to turn to the Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers presentation for our last 30 minutes, and that is Commissioner Jeffrey Lopes. So if you want to raise a question during your time, you're certainly free to use that. I'll just turn
Thank
over
you,
to you.
Chairman Gordon. Thank you all. I just wanted to just quickly start with a disclaimer that my presentation today is going to be on behalf of Mamleo and not my employer, the City of Boston. So any and all of my presentation today is, in fact, a representation of my position at Mamleo. And then just quickly, my question was just, how are we measure, how are your departments measuring the effectiveness of those trainings? So we have a lot of trainings within police departments and fire departments, but how are we measuring how effective those trainings are in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
To Attorney Sharma, maybe you want to handle that?
I'm so sorry. Could you just repeat that question?
Yeah, so I was just asking if you know, how are departments measuring the effectiveness of those diversity trainings? Do you know, or if any of the law enforcement representatives, chiefs, or representing the fire departments, if they know as well?
I think that's one of the issues is I think it, as Mr. Papagnia pointed out, that it's very much left up to individual departments. But I think that's a really good point, that there does have to be some follow-up, perhaps on a state level or on a wider, broader level, to figure out how effective these trainings that we're putting all this time into are.
Okay, great, thank you. And if I could be made a co-host, I can share my PowerPoint.
You should be able to share.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm joined here with two of my past presidents as well, Eddie Crispin and Larry Ellison, as well as my vice president and our general counsel, Jim Gilden. So just going to do a quick presentation. I'd rather do Q&A than just speak to you all the entire time. I'd rather hear your point of view and your perspective. So just quickly, Mamleo was founded in 1968 with the purpose of recruiting and retaining Black police officers in Boston, and to serve as a service organization to the community. Mamleo, promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within law enforcement agencies across the Commonwealth, and we have been a leader in advancing police reform initiatives, as well as a pioneer in discrimination lawsuits, and our attorney can talk about that in a sec. So we have three kind of pillars of our organization: legal, advocacy, and community engagement. And I have to thank the Lawyers Committee and Ariel, the work that the Lawyers Committee has done for us, as well as the NAACP and ACLU, in really supporting our mission of helping to recruit Black and Brown police officers across the Commonwealth, helping with promotions, as well as helping with issues around discriminatory practices, around discipline. It has been key to our organization. So we represent members and potential members in civil service matters to include bypass, termination, or discipline issues, lawsuits for discriminatory practices. Some that have been successful are a drug hair test lawsuit, which LCR took the lead on, some recruitment lawsuits, and as well as some promotional lawsuits that we recently challenged and won. Advocacy, working with police departments to advocate on behalf of our membership when things come up or when issues come up that we can kind of step in and assist with, as well as advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion focus within police departments, and having active conversation with the police departments around police reform and what police reform looks like. In terms of community engagement, I know we talk a lot about recruitment. We've been actively engaging with community stakeholders and community organizations, sponsoring events, and making sure there's a positive police presence in the community so that we can get people positively thinking about the profession of policing, as well as hosting dialogues with those who are interested in law enforcement, as well as those who have not traditionally been interested in law enforcement, trying to change their perspective on law enforcement. So just some of the issues that we've seen. I know that Ariel talked about some of these issues because we do partner very closely with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. In terms of police department bypass concerns, lack of cultural competency within the hiring process, we've seen a significant lack of understanding and acknowledgement during hiring processes of diverse cultural experiences. Some examples of that is bypasses for driving records. Oftentimes we see someone who grew up in the inner city who may have gotten 3 equipment violations on their vehicle, be a busted taillight, headlight out. But because of those three violations, they are bypassed from the process, which doesn't take into account, some of the, consequences that our applicants face when they live in urban communities and they have to face certain challenges every day. And another big thing is the lack of opportunity for applicants to explain anything that's considered questionable. So we know that throughout the process, a recruit investigator is in charge of that process. And oftentimes when things come up, they don't give the applicant the opportunity to explain the challenge. And then that challenge leads to that officer being bypassed. Another significant concern that we've seen is minor criminal offenses. So some applicants come on with past criminal behavior, and despite how minor that criminal behavior is, it can result in a disqualification. So the same benefit of the doubt has not been applied to minority candidates as has been applied to their white counterparts. And I know that Ariel mentioned this case earlier, but Boston versus Malik Morgan was a case that that Malik came to MAMLEO, and we ended up referring that case out to the lawyers committee, and civil service ordered the Boston Police Department to reinstate Malik Morgan after an incident that occurred 16 years prior, which he had been exonerated on. And that was the second time that the Commonwealth had ordered the department to reinstate someone in the past several years, and it was a person of color. And then also questions of truthfulness. Oftentimes we see a different account from the applicant than what the police officer put in the report. And despite an officer being exonerated by that incident or being found not guilty, the police department takes into account the allegations that were put forward by the police officer, which oftentimes poses in the police department's bypassing the recruit, saying that they were untruthful in their application. So significant lacks of transparency in the hiring process. Oftentimes, we're getting phone calls at MAMLEO, applicants not knowing the status of the application or status of the hiring process. And police departments have often failed to communicate with applicants, causing challenges in the hiring process. And this is something that our attorneys have been working really closely with police departments to try to understand why aren't they providing feedback, or why aren't they providing information back to the candidates as they're going through the process. Examples could be applicants not knowing what's missing from that application, or something just simply being missing. And instead of, the department's letting that applicant know, they're kind of bypassing that applicant, saying that they had an incomplete application. Also, we've seen issues with police departments being unable to contact previous employers, which has caused applicants to be bypassed, even though it's out of that applicant's hands why they couldn't get in contact with the previous employer. Also, what we're seeing is a lack of clear rules and procedures in terms of hiring. Recruit investigation standards differ by department. Hiring investigators do not follow the same approach with all applicants. So one applicant could be told one thing and another applicant could be told another thing. Examples are recruits not being able to clarify or explain something in the application, as I mentioned earlier, but also a significant lack of communication between hiring investigators and recruit applicants, and just significant lack of empathy and understanding in the process is something that we've seen extensively. One of the cases that I wanted to highlight here was MCAD and Claude DeFay versus the city of Boston. This was African-American recruit candidate who was dismissed from the police academy and terminated for an accusation of cheating. There was no evidence of him cheating other than an account from a Brookline police recruit stating that he had asked him about the exam. DeFay filed an MCAD complaint alleging discrimination. In 2011, MCAD found that he and other minority recruits had been treated differently from their white peers. And in 2013, MCAD had ordered the Boston Police Department to reinstate DeFay with his seniority, back pay, and damages for emotional distress. So this showing a pattern of officers being treated differently even after they're hired in the police academy. And this was a significant case for MAMLEO as well as LCR. And then within promotional concerns, addressing the lack of BIPOC supervisors in the police workforce, overwhelmingly promotions have lacked diversity, which we find only hurts communities, because the supervisory rank as well as the officers on the street should reflect the community. And one of our lawsuits was the Smith case, which we won, which the lawsuit showed that the lieutenant's exam did not measure the skills needed to become a supervisor. And in that lawsuit, it describes how there was some discriminatory factors in that lawsuit. And so kind of understanding our position with civil service, we find at Mamleo that civil service is kind of the only way to go. I know we've heard from several people who have said that they have left civil service, but without civil service, there's no real appeal mechanism. There's no state regulatory authority that we could go to when we have a concern. And so Mamleo finds that civil service is our best option, and civil service does give us that ability to appeal or to support our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some proposed changes that we've talked about recently, in terms of veteran status, we believe in veteran status. A lot of our members are veterans. It's come before us that a lot of the veterans of color have been bypassed. The same concerns that we've seen in terms of regular people being bypassed, our veterans have been bypassed. So veterans receive a preference to join the police departments and receive a two-point preference on promotional exams. We've kind of been looking at some different systems across the country. And so New York has a system where, veteran preference is either applied at the original appointment or at promotion and not both. And if you look at New York's numbers, New York is 55% minority. Their NYPD workforce is 55% minority, which we found to be, to be kind of productive. Longevity points, when you're looking at promotional exams, promotional candidates are provided 2 additional points after 25 years in law enforcement. We find that 25 years in law enforcement, most people are looking for their exit plan, not on promotions, and that this should be changed to 15 a year in law enforcement preference, and that comes directly from civil service. Language preference at this time, there's no preference for foreign language speakers. So this could be not only people who are people who are foreign born, but also people who are born here in the US who have learned second languages. We find that to be an amazing skill that allows for police officers to be more productive in their community. Some type of implementation of a preference allowing for additional points to be allotted to promotional exam candidates if another language is spoken, as well as time of examination. So, exams are being prolonged. Departments are using exams for 5-6 years, and there's no specific schedule that some of these municipalities are following. And so we found that promotional exams should be held every 3 years. That allows for us to kind of recycle candidates and make sure that those are most qualified are on these promotional exams. And then we've talked extensively about recruit initiatives, and Mamleo's been talking about ways to help recruit more people into the force, especially people of color and females. So partnering with local colleges and universities to recruit a diverse workforce, creating certificate programs and other incentives to join law enforcement, engaging with community members at local events and schools. We're looking to create some curriculum that can educate people on the role and benefits of being a police officer, creating programs to prepare police officers for the police academy to avoid a dismissal from the police academy. We've seen a lot of people going into the police academy but not being prepared. So creating a system to help them prepare prior to going in, working with civil service to streamline the exam fee waiver. So there isn't a waiver for the exam, but that process is kind of, you have to submit all these different welfare paperwork and stuff like that, and that should be changed. Encourage police departments to fund recruitment outreach initiatives. What we're seeing is that recruitment only happens, several months prior to the exam. Recruitment should really be happening throughout the year. And so there should be dedicated recruitment offices. And those recruitment offices should include sworn personnel, not just civilian personnel. And then partnering with MPTC to host trainings and police academy opportunities. If we want to recruit a more diverse workforce, then we have to be partnering with our state agencies to help support that work. And then I just wanted to give our attorney, Jim Gilden, an opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, President Lopes. I didn't expect to be called upon, but the word I've heard, and the important word, I believe, that we all have to acknowledge, and many of you have, is implicit bias. I firmly believe in civil service. I firmly believe that civil service provides an opportunity for minority candidates to get a fair hearing where sometimes they don't in the cities and towns that are in the hiring process. And particularly in the small towns where the hiring is done generally with a panel of superior officers. But it's very hard for a minority candidate facing usually 3 superior officers when there's no one on that panel that looks like either he or she. There has to be some acknowledgement of the fact that implicit bias does occur. And as one former civil service commissioner once said to me, if they don't hire one of your guys, then they hire one of their guys. And that's a sad state of affairs. I think a lot of the stuff that's been discussed is very helpful. I think there has to be a move on the part of the state as a whole to not only to encourage people of color all people to apply for public safety, and not just police, but fire also, to explain the job, to encourage, educate the folks before the civil service comes out, before the exams come out, so they have an opportunity and a reason to take those exams. Being a cop nowadays is not the honorable profession in the eye of much of the public that it once was. And being an attorney for over 50 years, I believe that on the whole, law enforcement is an honorable profession, and that the vast majority of those members of police departments treat it that way. But the hiring process brings out, and sometimes the worst of people. You talk about veterans' preference. I've had disabled veterans whose job was to operate heavy equipment and trucks in Afghanistan and Iraq under ambush conditions, who have been wounded and received Purple Hearts, and who have been bypassed because their driving record was not as great in the city of Boston. They can drive in Afghanistan, they can get blown up, but they can't drive through Roxbury. It is inherently wrong. And it's only civil service that offers the kind of protection for this kind of decision-making. I've seen individuals who were charged with crimes, exonerated, led unbelievable employment histories, 2 jobs during their entire career, jobs where they had responsible positions, some were semi-law enforcement positions, and yet because of something they did in high school that were never convicted of, they were bypassed. The position of some police departments is if you make a mistake or leave something out on your application, that you're lying, and that you're trying to, you're hiding something that might be negative on a purposely to make yourself look better. That can be a basis for bypass, but is that applied to non-minority candidates? It appears not to. Civil service is necessary to prevent those types of injustices. And training, outreach, training of recruitment officers, recruitment programs, and reaching out to colleges, churches, and I've suggested to Mamlio that we try to put together a recruitment team that will work together with other agencies and other organizations to further encourage Black and Brown individuals to at least try out for the exam. There are other organizations like Mamlio. LEGO, which is the Hispanic organization, has done a great job in providing a training program, an educational program for potential recruits so they take the exam. I don't want to take any more time, particularly for an unprepared presentation, so I'll pass back to my president.
Commissioner, does that conclude your presentation? Lead to questions? Commissioner Lopes? Okay. I'm going to just assume that we can start asking questions. We've got about 7 minutes left until 12, and I know some folks leave the call at that point. If Attorney Gilden, if you could, I think Attorney Lopes is here, but I'd love to have a copy of the commission would love to have a copy of the presentation, the slideshow, the deck, I think we call it. There was great information. In fact, I took a screenshot of some of those pages, but the deck would be easier.
I'm sure that's available.
Okay, one question I have. Well, first of all, when you spoke about some of the hiring practices that you referred to, and I know that you weren't prepared to speak today, but if there's empirical data to support some of the conclusions that you talked about, we don't have time within one 2-hour commission meeting to develop all of that. But and again, because I know that you might have been sort of on the spot to speak, but I would like to see if there is such information, or perhaps lawsuits have such information, you can just give us the site as to the bypass of some candidates in favor of another. It would just help in our report. And then one of the changes recently made in civil service was to give annual exams as opposed to less frequent exams. And I'm wondering your opinion on the effect of more frequent, these would be for entry exams. Talk about that.
I think that would be helpful. I know that sometimes the financial aspect of having to take the exams is a barrier. And there was some talk about scholarship or simplifying the process for a waiver of exams would be appropriate. The only question is, then you have to worry about certifying a list every year, and I'm not so sure that usually, at least as far as Boston's concerned, they get 2, possibly 3 classes out of each certificate each year that the exam is certified and the list comes out. So I'm not so sure that would make a big difference to the larger communities. Now, it might make a difference to some of the smaller communities. My town of Sharon is out of civil service, and it was through advocacy and lobbying the town that they've now added several minorities to their department. And sometimes the chief is the best, if you get to the chief, often the chief is responsive, and I found that in several communities of non-civil service communities, and possibly there could be some better communication between those communities and the Civil Service Commission in terms of training and review.
Okay, thank you. Chair Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I just, like you mentioned, if we can get a copy of the presentations that were done on the slides there, that would be very important. I think we have to get as much factual data as possible because there's a lot of discussion, not just here, but in the public that may or may not be factual opinions of what's happening now. And I think we've got to get the correct data. And even today, we only have a limited time. There's so much more we have to delve into this to get the correct information. So as we move forward, we do the right thing and make things more amenable across the board. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to leave it up to the rest of the crew to give their input. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make an observation that it's employment bypasses are conducted by the municipality and not civil service. So it seems if there's improper bypasses going on, it's on the departments and not civil service, but civil service is there to actually correct those improper bypasses. And just going back to what was my previous statement, Ms. Sharma, I just checked the tape. I just want to make sure that I was heard correctly, that Ms. Sharma, when talking about veterans preference, said, quote, actively investigating and holding accountable those departments that are using the preference to uphold racism, end quote. So I again ask for some proof that veterans preference is being used to uphold racism, because I'll tell you right now, I'll be the loudest, the first and loudest voice that if that's proven to be calling for an investigation and accountability. And I would also ask the chair for an apology because that was the quote and it was exactly what I said when I first spoke. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ellison.
No apology.
No, I heard what I heard, which is to say that Attorney Sharma was talking about discriminating between one group of veterans and another group of veterans, not between veterans and non-veterans.
But I said that, exactly what I said, and that was the question. And you
I don't really want to have an argument with you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Ellison.
Thank you all this morning for your time. I was served as president of MAMLIA for 10 years prior to the current president and the previous president before me. A lot of these issues I dealt with at that time, and even people before me were still dealing with these issues since MAMLIA's conception in 1968. I always tell people, if you talk about recruitment, show me your budget for it, and I'll show you your commitment to it. And we really haven't seen that. And I think it was Senator Kennedy from down in the Brockton area. The late mayor of Brockton really showed what a leadership is as a leader in a town. Attorney Gilden was present with me when we went to Brockton several years ago about the lack of diversity in their police department. And he agreed that it was egregious and it should be changed. And he sat across from us and his chief counsel was there and he said to us, if you have to sue me because I want to get it done. So I guess the question is, what are we going to do to move this forward? Because in Boston alone, the population here is down 4% Black people. The cost to live in Boston is up. It's the average price is over $500,000. The Boston Globe did a study over 8 years ago now that the average income net worth of a Black family in Boston is $8. That doesn't even qualify. In white families, it's almost $250,000. It doesn't qualify you for the financial investment of even just taking a test that is somewhere around $250 today. So we've talked about this enough, and I appreciate the time this morning again to do so. But what is the plan to address the issue that is keeping people of color from advancing and also becoming police firefighters in the civil service? Thank you.
Thank you. And part of the task that we're here to address would be directed at some of the questions that you raised, so I appreciate that. I don't see any other hands raised, and we've reached the hour of 12 o'clock, and we have seen some departures from among commissioners in the chat, and I realize that we carve out a 2-hour section. So I'm going to go past the report of subcommittees, and we'll talk about that next time. The next committee hearing is October. Elizabeth Donovan, you're on the line. Just tell me what's the date. Lizzie Donovan, what's the date?
Yes, Chair Gordon, the next date for our general meeting, I believe, is tentatively scheduled for October 15th.
October 15th. And what we'd like to do is we have not heard from the Law Enforcement Officers Union. I think that's Marcella King. Is that, will you be able to present that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And what I'd like to do, because we'll probably have an hour left, is if Senator Moore is here, if there's no objection, if you could talk about the work of your subcommittee, which is the subcommittee on, I see we've got a representative from your office here. So if you could talk to the senator about maybe taking some time with the overall commission about some of the, what you've learned in the subcommittee on those communities in civil service. We would love to have that discussion. What I'm thinking is, I know you've had many hearings and even subcommittee here of the subcommittee. So maybe you've heard from some witnesses. I know these are all recorded. So maybe you could bring us some of these witnesses that we should hear from, and maybe, you know, play excerpts from those recordings. I'm thinking that that might be very interesting for this overall commission to hear. But let's think about doing that at that next meeting, and then after that we'll have the reports of other subcommittees. Again, unless there's an objection to that, I think the chairs would like to hear that way.
I'll talk to him, but I'm sure I'll be happy to do just that.
Yeah, you can connect with our office. Senator Brady, any last words?
Just that we, you know, as I mentioned, if we can't get copies of the screen presentations that were given today, and I think we're just touching the surface on a lot of things that we have to get more deeper into the facts that, because I hear it's almost, and I hate to use the analogy, but it's almost like blasts on these internet sites that aren't always true. I think we got to delve down deeper to get to what's actually happened. I know some communities are doing a better job than others. I know that as we talk about this whole discussion, that we probably, each community, every municipality is different. As we move forward, we're trying to keep unification on what we do in hiring practices and all of the above. But it depends on each community and what their communities are representing as well. I think that there's been a lot of discussion about civil service and whether it works or not. And I think we have to have fair and equitable hiring processes. And I think we don't have enough time today, but I think we got to delve more into this because there's a lot of comments that are made, but I want to make sure we get the facts out there, not just the misinformation that's out there. And I'm not even talking about just the panel today. I'm talking about what we all hear out in the public there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will see you again at our next meeting. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the experts in the field for sharing your experiences with respect to this civil service issue. So thank you, everybody. See you next time. Thank you. Oh, motion to adjourn. I should say that.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Second. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody say no? Against it, say no. Motion passes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.